So we're 1 minute past 12 here. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. I know we'll probably get a few late participants here signing on, but I want to again welcome you to Innovate Pasadena's Ask Me Anything lunchtime series. We do this every other Wednesday at 12 p.m. And today we are, well, I should introduce myself first. So hello, my name is Beth Kuchar, and I'm a chairperson at Innovate Pasadena. And I'm really happy to welcome our guest speaker today, Harrison Tang, who is the CEO and founder of Spokeo. And everybody in Pasadena is familiar with Spokeo, but I'll let Harrison talk a little bit about that in a second. And I should also mention Harrison is also a board member at Innovate Pasadena and a longtime supporter of our organization. So Harrison, thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you for the introduction. So hi, everyone. As you guys know, I'm Harrison, and also known as the CEO Dad. So you can actually find me on Facebook and Twitter. Just as my social handle entails, I'm the CEO of Spokeo, a leading people search engine that helps about 15 million unique visitors a month to search and connect and know who they're dealing with. And I'm also a dad of 3 sons, so these two things are definitely keeping me pretty busy every single day. So thank you.
So we have a few questions that the audience did ask ahead of time, and I'm going to put the first question up here on the screen for you.
Great. All right, so I'll read the question, I'll just answer it. So the first question is, as a new company, what's the best way to gauge the ideal and realistic pricing of an unreleased product to make a profit? So first of all, there's roughly 3 kinds of pricing strategies. The first one is called cost-based pricing. Okay, so basically, if your cost is like $10 and you want 10% margin, then you just charge $11. Okay, so that's cost-based pricing. The second type is called competitive-based pricing. So basically, once you identify your competitive sets, and generally they all have pretty similar pricing. It's a range, but very, very similar. So you just say, if your competitors are charging $10, then you just charge $10. Or if you want to be a little bit cheaper, you charge $9 or vice versa. So that's called a competitive-based pricing. The last is value-based pricing. So essentially, you charge what the customer is willing to pay. So there's 3 types of pricing, and ideally, in most situations, you want to get to value-based pricing. But that said, the question is about, as a new company with a new product that's not released, I would highly advise against that. Okay, so all these different 3 strategies, they have pros and cons. And one of the cons for value-based pricing is that it takes a lot of time. So for a new product that's unreleased, I would highly advise for competitive-based pricing, because competitive-based pricing usually captures about 70% of the value, right? And value-based pricing is used to get you from 70% to 90%, essentially. And in marketing, there's 4 Ps: product, price, placement, which is channels, placement, and promotions. And so when you want to find your product market fit, when you're new, you want to find the product market fit, and there's all these like 4 variables that you have to tackle and overcome. So spending all the time to try to figure out the value-based pricing, I think it's just a waste of time. So when it's new, have a little respect for your competitors, right? Have a little respect that they've done their homework. And I would just say, copy them and do the competitive-based pricing when you're new.
So I think this is a continuation of that first question here.
Yeah, so How does it differ for B2B companies, and what about consumer, B2C, direct to consumer companies? So first of all, the main difference between B2B companies and direct to consumer companies is usually volume, volume of customers that you have to deal with. So generally speaking, when you go direct to consumers, you have a lot more customers, right? And B2B, you have a lot less. So in Spokeo's example, we have literally millions of people that we can do A/B testing and things like that on. Whereas for enterprise, you're usually talking about tens or hundreds. So for direct to consumer companies, to start off, again, I would say competitive-based pricing is the best. And then to transition and evolve to value-based pricing, generally speaking, you do A/B tests. And for A/B tests, what you do is you just hold a cohort of users, and then you show the exact same experience, same payment page, same user acquisition funnels, everything's the same, except that the price is different. Okay, so using the example, maybe the control is $10 and you want to test $15 price point. You just show one set of users $10, the other set $15, and then and just hold that cohort of users and see what the revenue is. Now, if you want to do something crazy, then what you want to do is you want to do what's called LTV, which is basically a kind of revenue estimation. And if your subscription is relatively easy, you just do a LTV estimation. You generally, at Spokeo, is a subscription-based pricing. So you hold a cohort of users, and then you see the revenue collection in the next 3 months. So you have about 3 data points, and you can do a projection of what the survival curve, essentially the rate of turnover, customer turnover, survival curve, and you estimate it. You see what the estimated customer lifetime value is. Now, if you're not a subscription company, you can do basically you need a extra variable which predict the likelihood to return and do a repeat purchase. So you can do that. That's a more crazy way of doing it. The simple way is just do it in Excel. Hold a cohort and see the revenue, and then just figure out, hey, is there a lift in revenue per user, right, or revenue per visitor? And that's it. So you do it through A/B testing. Now for B2B, you don't have that kind of volume. So generally speaking, you have to do it through surveys. So it's a survey-based kind of pricing research. So there's 2 standard ways to do it. One way is called Van Westendorp. I think I don't want to butcher that Dutch guy's name. I think it's called Van Westendorp or something like that. Okay, so you can look it up. And basically, it just asks about 4 questions. It asks like, hey, at what price do you think this product is too expensive, right? And then the second is, at what price do you think it's too cheap, right? And then the third question is, at what price do you think it's kind of expensive? And lastly, at what price do you think it's cheap and good value? So you ask 4 questions, you survey the users, you get those responses back, and then you do a cumulative chart, and you flip 2 questions. So it becomes the cumulative chart becomes have cross sections and cross points, and then you look at the a pricing band, and then you try to figure out the right price within that pricing band. So that's I think that's called Van Westendorp or something like that. It's one of the most common marketing research methodologies. So if you want to learn more, just go search for it. I think it has a Wikipedia article on it. So that's one way to do it. The other way is, I think it's called Gaber or something. So basically you ask about a couple of random price points, and if the users say, hey, no, this price is too expensive, right? I think it's a 5-point scale. And if it's too expensive, then you stop asking that question, and then you just kind of calibrate it as you go. So those are the different methodologies. don't ask users a free form field called, hey, who are you willing to pay? By the way, this kind of surveys and exercise is usually called willingness to pay. So don't ask one question, say, hey, who are you willing to pay? And then just a free form field, and then ask them to enter any price point they want. We tried that a couple of times. You're not going to get any actionable insight. So it's just a waste of time. So I think what the best practice will be those two methodologies. So to sum up, if you're a direct to consumer, do it through A/B tests. If you to optimize your pricing strategy, and if you're a B2B and you don't have that big volume, meaning like hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of people giving these data points, and do it through the market research, the survey-based kind of research to get these insights.
And I know we have another question here for the audience, but I wanted to interrupt real quick and ask, do you have any tools that you use at Spokeo that you would recommend people could check out to help with A/B testing and testing, with surveys?
So we actually do it all in-house because these methodologies, again, these are just surveys, right? So you can just going through Wikipedia and search like von Westendorf, and then add a keyword called Dutch, because I think that guy's Dutch, and then you'll see the article. So and then you'll tell you the questions. So you can just do that. Now the tough part is analysis. How do you do the analysis, right? So I briefly go over it. You do accumulated points, and then draw the charts and things like that. So there are articles and things like that that kind of teaches you how to do that. But you have to read it, right? So I think, long story short, at Spokeo, we do it in-house. I know there are other tools out there and companies that does pricing strategies and market research. So I think you can try those things out as well. Mm-hmm.
And we have, I'm just doing a quick screen share. This is the pricing model that you were referencing earlier, and Westendorp showing those two factors kind of crossing over. Yes. So that people can search for it.
Thank you. All right, so this question is, how can I test different price points without alienating my customers? So first of all, when you do a survey-based pricing, obviously that doesn't alienate anybody, right? So because those prices are not actually the price on the site, you're just asking them, what are you willing to pay, or how much higher are you willing to pay, or how much lower are you willing to pay, that kind of thing. So obviously, one of the advantage of doing through surveys is that you don't have this kind of concern. Now, obviously there's disadvantage of doing using surveys. It's not as exact, right? When we're talking about A/B tests, like, we get literally tens of thousands of data points. So whereas surveys, you're talking about something like 100, right? So obviously A/B tests, I think is a lot more exact, right? So now, how do you do an A/B test that doesn't alienate people? First of all, I don't think that concern is that big, right? Now, if you do it all the time, that probably will agitate some users, right? But then as long as you kind of hold the price point, meaning that if the user sees one of the test points, let's say your control is $10 and your new price point is $15, right? Or in another example, let's say $5. You just want to make sure that you honor that price point throughout customers' journey, right? So if it's a $15 example, and later you change the price, you don't change it to $20, right? Without notifying them and things like that. So I think that's a key thing that you want to make sure. I think the worst thing that can happen in this kind of A/B test is that, and this kind of thing happened before, is that when you change the tests and then there's some bugs and things like that, and then instead of charging people the tested price point, you randomly change it through that user's particular journey, and that's when you get a lot of complaints. But then in regards to kind of the fear for cross shopping and something like, oh, I saw that your site's control price point is cheaper than what I pay. That doesn't happen that often, actually. In my experience, that doesn't happen almost ever. And the reason is because you have a cookie on the site. So once unless that user kind of clears that cookie and things like that, they'll never see the other kind of price points, right? And even if they do, the customer care will help them out. So I don't see that as a big issue. And by the way, certain industries change their price all the time. For example, travel industries, they do dynamic pricing and they change it all the time, right? So again, I think the concern of users getting frustrated that you're testing different prices, it's not that of a big concern, and you can mitigate by what I've just said. Using making sure that they see a consistent price throughout their customer journey through cookies and through making sure that your system doesn't have bugs. You hold that price, through the customer journey.
Great. And I just want to remind the audience, if you have a question for Harrison, you can go ahead and type it in the Q&A, or if you can't find the Q&A, you can type it in chat and he will answer your question. And it looks, Harrison, like we have a couple of questions from the audience here. So Robbie, hi Robbie, asks, can you share ways in which the cost of customer acquisition and the customer lifetime value impact pricing?
Sure. So first of all, in the ideal situation, right? Not ideal situation, in most situations, you want to make sure your customer lifetime value is higher than the customer acquisition, right? CPA, because if that doesn't happen, then your business probably will go belly up pretty soon. So, so anyway, so I think first thing first, let's make sure that your customer segment's LTV is higher than your customer segment's CPA. So that's the first thing to make sure. Now, how do you know and how do you decide what we call at Spokeo LTV margin? So LTV margin is basically customer lifetime value minus customer acquisition cost, right? LTV minus CPA divided by LTV. So how do you determine that? The truth is, it's kind of an art thing, and it depends on different channels. So generally speaking, for paid marketing, we like to hold about north of 30%. Okay. And why is 30%? Because generally speaking, in the value of a product, a third is this is using e-commerce analogy, a third is the cost of good, a third is the middleman, right? A third is the end user distribution. So usually that's how it works. So at Spokeo, for paid marketing, we generally like to take about a third of the pie. But it depends on different channels. So for example, certain channels, you want to focus on growth. So in those channels, we'll particularly say, hey, we would like to basically maximize number of page views, right? At the expense of LTV margin. So in those cases, we would drop the LTV margin target down to about 5% or so, or 5 to 10%. And then you go for the reach, right? But at Spokeo, we only do ROI positive advertising. So in other words, if the CPA is higher than LTV, then we'll proactively cut that ad spend.
Great. And it looks like we have another anonymous question here from the audience. How often should you revisit your product pricing?
Yeah. So first of all, product pricing is not a one-time thing. Okay. So a lot of people thought, hey, I fix a price and I don't change it forever. That's a very, very wrong mindset. Because in the theoretical situation, as I mentioned, value-based pricing is the way to go, right? You want to charge your product at the point that your customer is willing to pay, right? So in the theoretical situation, value-based pricing is the way to go. And the truth is the value-based pricing changes over time because the general market condition changes. And by the way, your product hopefully also changes too, right? So it changes over time. So the thinking that, I change and I only test pricing like once a year or once every 2 years, I think that's too infrequent, right? So I think the good frequency will be about 3 months, every quarter or so. Every quarter or 2 quarters, you should try to test new pricings and then try to figure out, hey, what is good price point for that your customer is willing to pay. Yeah. But I think the key thing is you have to do it consistently, right? So because the pricing strategy and pricing exercise is an ongoing effort. It's not a one-time thing. Mm-hmm.
So build that into your business as part of what you do, in other words.
Yeah, as in marketing, people like to use acronyms, and one of the most famous acronyms is the 4P, right? So if you really think about it, for the 4Ps again are product, right? Price, placement, and promotions. And if you really think about it, if you spend so much time on product and you spend 0 time on pricing, does that even make sense, right? There's a reason why price is one of the 4 pillars in marketing. So I think I'm not advising for overdoing it, but I think a lot of startup people, they forgot the importance of pricing, and they just thought, hey, I just I just set this price and forget about it. I think that's the wrong mindset. Mm-hmm.
I feel like you almost just made a great segue into this next question that we have here, which is, how can you determine if a freemium model will work for your startup?
So I think for this particular question, I think 2 things, right? One is this product launched or is it not yet, right? If it's launched and you have a baseline, then I would say test it, right? And I'm assuming this is a direct to consumer product, right? And I would just say test it, just do an A/B test and see what happens. Now if you haven't released it, then I think the key thing is you have to think about what's the value of the freemium tier. Okay, what's the value of the freemium tier? And generally speaking, if your business model is premium subscriptions, the value of freemium tier is basically trying to help you to increase your upper funnel so you can sell more subscriptions, right? So in other words, the value of freemium tier is actually marketing, right? So you have to figure out, hey, do you have enough value propositions? Like, for example, if your value proposition is just 3 bullet point, I would advise against a freemium because there's not much you can provide, right? But then assuming you have a bunch of value propositions and enough to kind of segment your product to freemium, premium, premium plus, that kind of thing. Assuming that's the case, then you have to think about, hey, what kind of value do I put in the freemium tier so that I can upsell the users to the premium tier? So that's the first thing first. Now, the second thing to consider is to think about if your product actually has potential for virality, In other words, if your product has potentials that people or the users, when they like it, they will share with other people. Those kind of features you want to put in freemium because it becomes a way to kind of get more users to the funnel so you can sell more subscriptions, right? So I think that's a couple things that you should consider. So if your product doesn't have any virality built in, and you don't have a lot of value to segment to provide for free, then I would say don't do a freemium tier, right? Now, if you check if your product checks those boxes, then I would say go for it, you know. And if you already have existing customers, then I would say test it, right? Because at the end of the day, different market have different dynamics, and what I just shared is more of a general rule of thumb, and I think you will be surprised a lot of times when you test it what will happen.
So we do have a few more minutes left here for audience questions. So I just want to remind everyone, if you have a question for Harrison about pricing, please type it into the Q&A, or you can go ahead and type it into the chat. But I was curious, actually, so this is my question to you. Do you have any kind of recommendation or rule of thumb for yourself, even when approaching pricing? How much should you take your competitors' pricing into consideration? Because I think people do oftentimes get hung up on what their competitors are doing to set their own price.
So I think for this question, it depends on your products and the target market's competitiveness, right, and maturity. So if your product doesn't have a lot of differentiation, and your market is very competitive and mature, then I would say, don't try to be too cool here, right? Try to stick with the competitive pricing. Now, if your product is very, very differentiated, then that's a different story. But then generally speaking, I would advise for not going beyond the band, right? So generally speaking, in competitive landscape, the pricing has a certain band, and it doesn't go, like the difference is not like 50%, okay? So there's a certain band. I would advise for sticking with that. And then if you have a very differentiated product, and that differentiated product, generally speaking, differentiated products, generally speaking, has a more niche appeal, right? And it's for a certain target audience. Then in those kind of situations, you just do it as an upsell, right? Post transaction, right? So I think that's what you can do. But generally, this question is really tying to this whole thing called product pricing mix, right? So essentially, what are the product packaging that you should offer at what price? And that's also, there are some methodologies to do it. Like, for example, in the survey-based pricing, a survey-based strategy, you can ask questions like, hey, what kind of products, you can survey your customers or prospective survey panels that's outside of your customers. Like what kind of features do you prefer, right, compared to other features? And then you can find out the product feature, relative product feature preference, right? And then you can do those things, So long story short, generally speaking, I would stick with a competitive range, and then you'd use A/B tests or other things to optimize to value-based pricing. But if you have a very differentiated feature sets and you want to get into like what's called product pricing mix and product feature packaging, then you can do those kind of survey methodologies to help you figure out.
Thank you. So we are at 12:30. We are going to wrap up here unless anyone has any last minute questions for Harrison. You could type that in real quick. Otherwise, I really want to thank you, Harrison Tang, CEO of Spokeo, Innovate Pasadena board member, Innovate Pasadena longtime supporter, for sharing your experience and your knowledge with the community here today. We really, really appreciate all of your time. any last minute parting words for our audience?
No, I think, no, this is great. I thank you for having me here. And if you guys further questions, just contact me, right? Whether through email or social media. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Harrison, for joining us today.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Beth.
Thanks
everyone.
everybody.